Hey there, I'm Andrew Joseph Keith, and in this video, I'm going to be showing you my process for doing a gesture study sculpture using a drawing from George Bridgman as a reference. In my premium course, we have exclusive lessons that provide more detail on introducing gesture into your work. If you want access to those lessons and other exclusive content, check out proko.com/sculpture. All right, now into the demo. Okay, in this gesture study, I'll be using this image from George Bridgman, and we'll be doing a figure gesture study. And like I was saying in the other video, I really love George Bridgman's drawings. They're just so informative and they're so information rich in how deep of an understanding he has with anatomy and gesture and structure. And he just puts these things together in a way that's really fun, really energetic. And so that's why I really like using his stuff as inspiration for these types of gesture studies. And doing a gesture study like this, without multiple angles, you know, it really does test yourself. Like, how well do you know the anatomy from the back if you can't look at the references from the back? So here you can see I'm doing the same thing that I try to do with most studies, starting off with the curve of the spine and then working out towards the extremities to the arms and legs. And once that gesture is established with the armature, then I can start adding pieces of clay to the torso first, building out the rib cage, and I like to use, you know, pieces of clay that are a little bit larger at this beginning stage. I know that there's a lot of mass that is needed in the chest area and in the pelvis, and so I can use a little bit larger pieces of clay, and then as I get further along in the process, then I use smaller and smaller pieces to establish the secondary forms once the primary forms are in place. I really love this pose because when I was in high school, I was actually a stuntman, which is just a male cheerleader. So I would stunt the girls, throw them up in the air, and they'd stand on my hands and things like that. And so it was really fun in that kind of gymnastic physique and pose. I just thought was a really fun and energetic image to do a gesture study from. So that was kind of what draws me to these dynamic poses. And so here you can see how simple I'm approaching the torso. I'm not trying to get too complicated at this point. Think of the bean, if you remember the bean from when Stan was doing his lesson. That's basically as complicated as you want to get, just a thin version of the bean, and then, you know, taking some clay and adding it to the legs, just a thin layer of clay first. And I'm working primarily from this first angle that I have that is of the reference, and so that's what I'm observing at this point, is this first angle, and then later I'll have to invent the rest of the gesture study. But at first I want to try to capture this first angle, and then I'll be able to kind of copy and paste some of the features onto the rest of the sculpture. Here I'm laying in just a little piece of clay to give an indication of where I think the rib cage should end, to show areas like where the 10th rib would be. And then I'm looking at the reference and I'm thinking, where does the next piece of clay belong? Building out the area of the glute and thinking about how that wraps around the leg. And the same thing on the other side. and building out the legs, just kind of pinching and laying in a thin layer of clay to build the secondary forms on top of. But just a thin cylinder is enough to begin with. So as you're building out the sculpture, the gesture study, at the beginning, just think thin cylinders, and then you can add things like the calves, the quads, those muscles on top. But you want to have that primary gesture in a thin cylinder first, and then the secondary forms, that's the last thing that you want to be worrying about with these studies, or one of the last things. And so now I'm working more in the round, observing it from multiple angles and trying to lay in some more features. Coming in and gonna build out this front arm. A little bit more. You can see how I have an indication of that shoulder and those forearm muscles. And just little pieces of clay, they're enough to give, quite a bit of information if they're in the right place. There's another piece of clay for the pectoralis muscles, the pecs. And you can see the start of that Loomis head. Where at the beginning it's very two-dimensional. It's only basically an outline, and then I come in and add some clay to the skull. That is a really useful tool in sculpting anything, is to represent it from one angle, and then once that angle is established, then you can move on to the next angle. Working that way, it makes things a little bit less overwhelming. It's a little bit more manageable. Putting in some thicker lats. And continuing to build out that Loomis head. And then you can see now I'm kind of jumping around different areas. I'll be working on the head for a little bit, and then I'll see that the arm needs a little bit more details. And then I'll come down to the leg. And so these gesture studies, once you get the torso and the primary forms established, then you can work in the round and really consider it from all sides and be moving it around and twisting it and looking at what doesn't look right, what looks like there just isn't nearly enough clay. And it's okay to keep things skinny throughout, but there'll be some areas that will stand out to you as just like, oh, this needs another piece of clay here, another piece of clay there. And that just comes from practicing, and you get better and better each time. And each time I do a gesture study, I learn something that improves the next one. And so it really is beneficial to do these types of studies where you're considering the figure as a whole rather than getting overwhelmed with different specific areas and overwhelmed with things like anatomy. I do like to lay in the anatomy even in these small studies, but I'm primarily focused on really getting the essence of the pose. And I also really like to try the best I can to take elements of the photo and apply them to the sculpture. those might be things like the sketchy style. I think this kind of loose, sketchy style that Bridgman has in this drawing, it translates really well to this similar, almost sketchy feel of a loosely done gesture study that I do just using my hands and, placing little bits of clay at a time. But as an artist, I encourage you to find references that inspire you. And so artists, whether it's 2D or 3D, that you really enjoy, and then trying to do something that's inspired by their work, that can be a really helpful exercise. Like, what do you like about it and what can you take from it and incorporate into your own work? And that's really what makes an artist a master, is that they were able to incorporate lessons from past masters. Michelangelo, Bernini, all of these other great historic sculptors, they learned a lot from the past. And so it's great to build on the knowledge of somebody that had more experience than you. And that's why I love these types of exercises. And just, putting pieces of clay and then moving around. I'm not afraid to, put a piece of clay and then kind of push it around on the surface so that it gets into position, so that it's, moving in the right direction if it's a muscle. And then setting this down with some clay on the base, that allows me to think about things like the pose and make sure that it's balanced. And working on that gluteus medius, that's something that's really exaggerated in this drawing. So I want to make sure that I capture that, and then laying in, where I feel it's still too skinny. There's some mass that's in the knee. The knee isn't usually as skinny as we think it is, because there's all of those bony structures in the knee. If somebody's, huge and got huge muscles in the upper and lower leg, then it can make the knee look a little bit thinner. But for the most part, the knee is thick, especially if it's a really thin person. Then the knees will be more, bony, more thick, because there is quite a bit of bone in that area. And there we have it. So there is one gesture study done from George Bridgman's drawing of this gymnast. So grab some clay and do it yourself. All right, thanks for watching. To get more lessons on gesture, or to submit your assignments so that they can be in a critique video, go over to proko.com/sculpture. I'll see you over there.